And welcome back to On the Record. So what we're saying is the Justice Act is not the answer, and that's it's crazy the way that, you know, how do we get out of that? I know that it seems like now council, even though that they've been talking about the Justice Act and getting more power and more jurisdiction for the court, it seems like now, because of the circumstances of the elections, it seems like they're fast tracking that Justice Act. What's your opinion on that?
Well, fast track. I don't know if fast tracking would be. I mean, they've been talking about it for years, so it's not.
Yeah.
It's nothing new. It's not something they've just brought up recently. I think though that the community should now, after what's happened with the election, should take a really close look at what the MCK is proposing and how it's going to work, and they shouldn't rush it. They take their time. I
was just going to say that.
Understand it. If people want to follow this, and if they want this to apply to the Bank Council and all its institutions, you know, take your time and look at it. You know, don't mind you. The next election is 3 years from now. You know, 3 years is a reasonable amount of time, really, in the real world. To look at a piece of legislation that is so complex and so far-reaching. And
you know, it's funny because regardless of how you look at it, this is an Indian Act system, and we have to follow the Indian Act. Well, council can say that we're not following it at all, but you know, I think that in some situations they'll say that they have no choice. But so either you follow it or you don't follow it. Now, if in the Indian Act system, you have to have your laws and or, you know, structure sent to Indian Affairs, right? And they have to accept the law.
In theory, yeah. In legislation, that's the way it works.
But I mean,
but the MCK hasn't followed that for years. MCK does stretch the envelope as much as it can,
and that's why we're in this situation today.
Well, when an individual from the community goes on the outside, when an individual decides that inside this envelope, I'm not happy, I'm not satisfied with the situation here, so I'm going to go on the outside, and that's when you get the pin in the balloon and it blows up. But you know, it's that's the frailty of the not only here but in other places across Canada.
I mean, not to defend Keith at all. It's the process that we talked about at previous shows and the same thing today. I think that if the process was done differently, we probably wouldn't be here. I think that anybody in the same situation, given the history that Keith had with everything, how can you trust that system? And then to have employees, which are judges in some cases, making decisions based on, it's tough to say whether or not it's going to be fair.
I'm glad you brought that word trust, because some people like Keith and others don't trust the system, yet there are many people they didn't trust Keith. I mean, the whole issue of Keith,
I agree with
problems inside the MCK for the both times that he had this non-confidence vote was a lack of trust, that they didn't trust Keith, you know. And so you have the two entities, you know, you have the trust in the system and the trust in the individual in conflict.
So I think that in order to resolve maybe in the future some of these issues, we need to have some type of public forum. And let's go back and let the community decide. Like we talked about before. You know, some people on the con side would say that, well, you're going to have 30 or 40 people to make a decision for the majority. Then on the other side, you're going to say, well, you know, we have to do something somewhere. But maybe that's what we need. And I think that if that happened, or even if it happens in the future, then the outside courts will recognize that more, because it's coming from the people.
The courts don't always have the answer, though. I mean, I think the whole idea of an ombudsman, which has been kicking around for a long time, and the council wanted to, but they say they can't afford an ombudsman. I think an ombudsman can deal with a lot of these issues without getting into legislation.
Just policy.
That's right. You know, and just you know, finding ways of getting the two parties together, conflict resolution procedures. You can probably resolve a lot of conflicts without ever getting into the legal system, because the legal system just is a huge headache, and also expensive. Yeah.
I think that regardless of how you look at it, it's gonna be expensive across the board. We do have an ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution System, that has been there for years now. It's not being utilized as much as they want it, but some people find it intrusive and others don't. So again, I don't know, you're gonna lose no matter how you're going to look at it.
In either way, people, don't want to use the ADR system, but then again, if you go to outside court or any
They wanna
court,
mediate.
you want, there's so many restrictions in that, and
Yeah.
that you have far more flexibility in ADR than you do in court. It's amazing how and a court can be very intrusive.
Yeah.
People have to make up their mind. I think, unfortunately, people like to take the things that they have the most confidence in, or they're comfortable in, even if it undermines the jurisdiction of this community.